Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Glory Glory podcast. I'm your host, as always, Kyle Quinn. And joining me today is a special guest, Callum McFadden. How's it going, Callum?
I'm doing well, Kyle. Always a pleasure to be back in the show. I just wish we had better things to talk about than Manchester United at the moment, because it's been a tough old time in recent months, and I'm sure, as we'll talk about, it might be continuing for a while longer.
Yeah, we've got four more games of this hardship to go, and then we can start looking forward to the future. So in this podcast, we're obviously going to take a look back at the Arsenal game, then look at some transfer rumours and other things going on around the club, and obviously talk a wee bit about Ten Hag. So looking at the Arsenal game, it was a bit different in some ways to what we witnessed in recent weeks, because United actually created loads and loads of chances in the game, but didn't put most of them away. So it was actually a better performance from an offensive point of view, but there were some shocking defensive errors which led to Arsenal goals and which ultimately cost United in the end. So what was your thoughts on the game, Callum?
Deeply frustrating from a United point of view, in the sense that, as you say, Kyle, I felt that United were far more dangerous in this game than they were at Anfield, although that wouldn't be difficult, particularly when we think back to that first half at Anfield where there was no shots on target or off target. Um, I just think that the frustrating thing for me was the fact that the goal that United concede first is just abysmal, from Varane and Telles. And I think when you're conceding a goal of that nature so early on in the game, it's always going to be tough. But I thought they responded relatively well to the challenge. Obviously, Ronaldo getting on the score sheet is always something that's good to see, particularly after the tough week that he had. But unfortunately, the damage was sort of already done there. Ronaldo, as I say, gets United back into the game when they're 2-0 down. And then the less said about the penalty, the better. But deeply frustrating in many ways, because as I agree with you, I think United played better than they have done offensively in a while now. But unfortunately, defensively, they are all over the place, and it shows every single match.
Okay, guys, please subscribe to the podcast if you're new here. Give us a wee like on the video if you're watching on YouTube, and comment your thoughts down below. Okay, I have to say that two of the worst performances on the day were Telles and Bruno. Unfortunately, Telles, of course, with that Sunday League era for the first goal, and then he gives away the penalty for the second goal. Bruno, of course, missed the penalty himself. He made an error for the Granit Xhaka's goal. An all-round bad game for him too. I think he had a real opportunity in the first half, Bruno, to dink it over the keeper, but he waited too long, and an Arsenal player got a challenge in, and managed to block it out for a corner. So Bruno has not been playing well lately, probably for most of the season, really, and he was given a new contract. I think the timing of that wasn't great. But Telles is just he's a substandard left back for me, and I mean, honestly, at this point, with Luke Shaw missing, I would have started Alvaro Fernandez and just given him a go, because he couldn't possibly be worse than Telles. So, what is your thoughts on those two players at the moment?
Very poor. I think I'm with you in the sense that United have been so bad for a number of weeks now that I struggle to understand why some of the same old players get picked or get brought on from the bench. I think it's important that the youthful players that are in and around the periphery of the squad get opportunities. I mean, Garnacho's been on the bench now for a number of weeks, but doesn't get the chance to come on and play any real minutes. We've seen Hannibal against Liverpool comes on and adds some steel, albeit in the last couple of minutes, and you could say in the wrong way. But it was good to see a United player, as Gary Neville said on commentary on Sky, actually look as if they wanted to be there at Anfield, unlike many others. So I want to see these youngsters. I'm not saying throw them all into a game, but I don't think there'd be any harm. Or Fernandez, as you're saying there, coming in and potentially starting a match, or getting a good half an hour, 25-minute cameo appearance, because United need a lift at the moment. When you look through the team, there's so many underperforming players. I think Bruno Fernandes is one that has let me down in terms of his performances recently. He's someone who I've championed since he arrived at Manchester United, but I think he spent his time moaning at referees and moaning at teammates and moaning at everyone else over the last sort of couple of months than he has done contributing on the park. And he's not the only one, and I think it's important not to scapegoat just one individual. Harry Maguire, of course, was mentioned so many times in the build-up to the Arsenal game. He gets taken out of the starting 11 and United still concede shambolic goals at the back. So it's safe to say it's not one player that's the issue or the problem. It's been a multitude of factors for a long time now. And as much as I was for Ollie and I backed him until the very end, I think it's fair to say that United not having a quote-unquote top coach for a number of years is coming home to roost now, because I think a lot of those players under Ollie, they were clearly managed well. He had a good rapport with them up until the last couple of weeks anyway. And I think they were getting by on sort of man management and you know how good you are, go out and play your game. Whereas when you watch City, when you watch Liverpool, when you watch Chelsea, and even when you watch Arsenal, particularly over the sort of turn of the new year, these are teams that look well drilled. They understand what they need to do, when they need to do it. The patterns of play are evident to see. And for United, under Ollie, it seemed as if get the ball to the final third and one of the front 3 or 4 players will make something happen out of a moment of magic. And unfortunately, I don't think United have majorly moved past that yet. Yes, under Ralph Rangnick, there have been some players that have improved, but there's too many like Telles, who you mentioned there, who just haven't improved and probably need to be moved on.
Yeah, there's been rumours that the players aren't really listening to Ralph Rangnick's instructions anymore, which is deeply troubling. You would like to think from next season onwards there'll be more complex coaching, and not the reliance on individual brilliance anymore, which happened for 3 years under Ollie. So I just want to also talk about the refereeing performance at the weekend. I thought he was absolutely dreadful. We should have had a penalty when Sancho went on that mazy run. And I think one the Arsenal defender fell on the ground and then stopped the ball with his arm. The Rangnick also complained about Xhaka's goal that there was Eddie Nketiah, I think it was blocking the view of De Gea. So and he thought that Ronaldo's second goal was onside. It was a very, very tight call. I thought the standard of the refereeing was pretty poor, but we had enough chances to score ourselves, didn't we? I mean, Dallo must have hit the woodwork twice, and he's the right back, so it kind of gives you an indication of how many chances we created. But we can't rely on the referee. But at the same time, he was pretty appalling, wasn't he?
It was a frustrating day for Craig Pawson, I believe it was, who was in charge. And the thing that frustrates me is VAR was brought in for the betterment of the game, for want of a better phrase, according to those that brought it in, and obviously to cut out errors. And again, I'm all for that. I think that's something that you need. I'm not the biggest fan of it in action because I think it takes too long. And I think if you're at a match, then it leads to a lot of confusion because you don't hear the conversations between Stockley Park and the referee. And I think there should be some way that fans can hear those or get a justification as to what's going on. Because if you're in the ground live and there's just an eerie silence, and then is he going to the monitor, is he not? Sometimes they put their hand on their microphone and you know something's going on, but you're not quite sure. And the frustrating thing for me, Kyle, is that there was a big fuss made in England about the referee going to the monitor, and I do think that's important, but I've yet to see a referee go to a monitor and change his mind. Anytime they walk towards the monitor, you can pretty much guarantee that whoever's at Stockley Park has said, like for instance, the Arsenal penalty, it's a penalty. He goes over to the screen and then looks at it maybe once or twice and then gives a penalty. I've yet to see a referee from memory this season or since they've been going to the screen go over, have a look and think, do you know, no, I'm going to stick with my gut instinct. So it's, to me, it's frustrating. I was surprised with some of the decisions that they didn't look at. The handball, obviously, from Cedric in the first half was one that I thought may have been looked at. But I suppose there's no real surprise in the sense that I think the referee in England, obviously I watch games a lot up here in Scotland at close quarters as well. I think there is inconsistencies across the board. I don't believe any referee has an agenda or any referee sets out to referee a game in a certain way to favour one team or the other. But I do think there needs to be greater levels of consistency, because it's frustrating from a fan's point of view. It's frustrating if you're covering the game as a writer, that you just want to see consistency. You just want to see parity between both sides, where if it's a foul for one team, call it as a foul for the other. I mean, we saw in the Everton game yesterday where they probably should have had a penalty, and again, VAR doesn't get called for, but at the same time, normally it would. So until they can iron out the inconsistencies, I think we're going to see lots of games with VAR, without VAR, where performances are just inconsistent and at times baffling, because if the VAR is going to only be used in a handful of occasions and not others, then that kind of calls into question the effectiveness of it. I mean, Peter Walton was saying in BT at one point, "Oh, the VAR can't check that foul because it was just outside the box and it was pretty much on the line." And I think if there's something contentious anywhere in the park, the VAR should be going there to help the referee. You know, so I was baffled by some of the decisions, but I suppose that's football.
Yeah, I mean, if Tellez's foul on Saka is a penalty, then the Matip's foul on Dan Gordon is definitely a penalty, and that's the type of inconsistency that infuriates fans. We thought that VAR was going to take that away, but it's still there. Clearly there's a lot of teething problems with VAR, like you mentioned. Peter Walton mentioned that VAR can't intervene because it wasn't in the penalty area. They're going to have to change that. Anything that's a major decision, and the VAR should have the right to intervene. So it's very, very frustrating. But apart from that, United could easily have got back to 2-2 and got themselves in the position to win the game had Ronaldo had taken the penalty. I don't understand why Bruno Fernandes was the one nominated to take that penalty, and it's 2 in a row that he's missed now, and probably don't want to see him to take another one. And that run up that he does is quite infuriating as well. And can you understand why Ronaldo wasn't taking that penalty?
I'm sure I read after the game that he said he wasn't in the right frame of mind to take the penalty, and after the week he's been through, I suppose you can completely understand that. But as you say, I would love to have seen him step up, because Fernandes, as good as he has been at penalties recently for United, he has been quite shaky. Obviously, blasted one over the bar in recent months, and then he obviously misses with a hop, skip, jump routine as he did at the weekend. And normally that routine, to be fair, works quite well for him. And when it comes off, you look like an absolute hero, and when it doesn't, you look really silly, as he did at the weekend. And it would have been such a crucial goal for United to get. And it's one of those where hopefully Ronaldo can take the penalties going forward, unless he goes through a bad run of missing, because I think it's important to change it up, especially when someone doesn't have the momentum with them. I think it's important that you do change penalty taker, and hopefully Ronaldo will step up for the next one, because if that goal goes in, I mean, we could be sitting here talking about United maybe winning the game 3-2, but as it is, the defence can't hold out, and it's a 3-1 defeat, and you're left thinking, get me to the end of the season, because it's just frustration after frustration after frustration, whether it's a poor performance or, like we saw with that penalty, United getting into a strong position and then not making the most of it.
Yeah, and Ronaldo seems to be the only player able to score for United at the moment. Another fantastic finish. The cross from Matic was slightly behind him, and he's able to dig it out and into the top corner. You got the hat-trick against Norwich, so you got the hat-trick against Spurs. He's having a strong finish to the season. I dread to think where we'd be without him. I mean, we'd be near the relegation zone probably. You hear a lot of pundits saying that Ronaldo is the problem for United, which I absolutely disagree with. Hopefully he stays on for another season. Some people find it hard to believe that he will want to stick around if United are in kind of the B level or C level European competition. But there's been no indication yet that he wants to leave. So I'm sure you want to see him stay as well.
I think, to be honest with you, Kyle, my opinion on Ronaldo is I only want him to stay if Erik Ten Hag wants him to stay. If Erik Ten Hag comes in and says, I want United to move on from Ronaldo and I want to do it my way and recruit, whether it's Darwin Núñez or it's another striker from continental Europe or someone within the Premier League, then I think he has to be back to do that. I think United really need to get to the point where they bring this man in, they've paid compensation for him. Unlike the other managers United have hired, I would argue he's the first since Ferguson to be on an upward trajectory in his career. I think Moyes coming after 12 years at Everton, although you could say, yes, he was moving up. 12 years at any club, I imagine, takes something out of you. Maybe he could have done with a break before he took his next job. Be interesting to see what he would say with that in hindsight, although you can't turn United down. And I think Van Gaal and Mourinho both came in at the wrong time of their careers. I think Mourinho would have been perfect for 2013 when Sir Alex stepped down, but obviously he returned to Chelsea. And Van Gaal, obviously, if Ferguson had retired many years earlier, would have been a fantastic choice. But I think coming after the spell he had in charge of the national team, it wasn't the right time for him. And Ollie, of course, let's be honest with you, got the job on the back of being a club legend and someone who could bring a feel-good factor back, which to his credit he did and more during his time in charge, just ultimately missing out on trophies. Whereas I think Eric Ten Hag is someone who, as I say, is coming in having worked well to get Go Ahead Eagles promoted to the Eredivisie. Working with Bayern Munich under Pep Guardiola with the second team, returning to the Eredivisie, of course, and taking on Utrecht, taking them into Europe and establishing them in the top half of that league before moving on to Ajax and having success not only domestically with 2 Dutch titles and 2 Dutch Cups, but obviously getting to the Champions League semi-finals where we all know what happened against Tottenham Hotspur and Mauricio Pochettino, who of course was linked to the job as well. But I think he's a manager, as I say, on the way up. I think it's interesting that people have cottoned on to the fact he's not as young as early media reports had you believe, with this whole young and up and coming idea. He's 52. He's been around the game. He's been an assistant at FC20 to Steve McLaren. He's been an assistant at PSV as well. So he's got experience of being an assistant. He's got experience of being a number one elite club level with Ajax, and he's got also experience of working at a lower down in the division, obviously a team that's newly promoted, a team that's mid-table, and obviously with Bayern second team. So for me, he's coming into the United job with a strong standing point. And as I say, with that answer on Ronaldo, I just hope that he's back to shape the team in his image, because if you're going to bring someone in who is going in the right direction as a coach, you need to back him. And even if it takes 2 or 3 years, United need to be able to ride it out, because if he comes in and finishes 6th next season, if you sack him and then bring in, I don't know, a Pochettino or an Allegri, I'm just throwing random names here, then you're going to be in the same boat where you're just going to chop and change and not make too much progress. So I think it's important United back him, buy into what he wants to do. And as I say, whether that's Ronaldo or Telles or Maguire or Pogba, obviously, who we expect to leave, if he wants that player to stay, try and get him to stay. If he wants that player to leave, try and find a solution, because there's no point of bringing in a manager with a style of play and a philosophy and then giving him a mishmash of players. We've seen that too often in the last 10 years that it just doesn't work, and it might work for a short-term period, but ultimately in the end, if you put square pegs in round holes, you get found out, and I hope he's allowed to do it his way, whatever way that may be.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. Ronaldo should only stay if Ten Hag wants him to stay, and I hope that is the case. He does seem to like a traditional number 9, because Sebastian Aller has been his first choice this season. So we'll wait and see how that develops. I mean, there's so many decisions for Ten Hag to make. It's probably the biggest job he will ever have, because I mean, the number of issues that need sorted are just astronomical. Paul Scholes' comments were very interesting on BT at the weekend, where he said he had a brief conversation with Jesse Lingard, and Jesse Lingard said that the dressing room is a disaster. I think we all get that sense ourselves. I was listening to a bit of Fabrizio Romano earlier on Mark Ulbrich's channel, The United Stand, and he said that he wouldn't say who the toxic players are, but he says 3 who definitely aren't, or Maguire, Shaw, and Bruno Fernandes. So we're still in the dark as to who these players are who've been leaking stories out to the press from inside the dressing room. But we've been told today that who 3 of them definitely are not. So it's a huge mess at the moment inside the dressing room. There seem to be huge problems there. The players who are not really giving their all anymore on the pitch. It's so very disjointed. Somebody pointed out to me that when Ronaldo scored the winner against Norwich, Maguire didn't even celebrate with him. Yeah, there's there's clearly problem. There's cliques within that dressing room. There are players who don't like each other. Players who don't. They didn't believe in Ollie towards the end. They don't believe in Ranić, and it's the worst dressing room that I can remember since I've been following football. So it's a hell of a job, isn't it, for Ten Hag to sort out?
It certainly is, and I think it's maybe understandable to see some tension between Ronaldo and Maguire, in the sense that I think Ronaldo, when he comes into any club in world football, is someone that all of the other players will naturally look up to. I mean, when he was announced, you just had to see the likes of Rashford and Sancho and others really full of admiration and real excitement for the fact they were going to play with Ronaldo. You know, I suppose you could say that's natural for any new signing, but with Ronaldo, it takes it to a whole new level. And I think for Harry Maguire, he probably did find it difficult in the early months of the season, where he's supposed to be the captain, the leader, the man in the dressing room who will be giving out instructions, maybe giving pep talks or whatever it may be. And obviously other players are maybe looking at him and thinking, you're not Ronaldo, sit down and let him speak. Now, again, that's just speculation and hearsay from my point of view, but I think that's only natural. Ronaldo is someone who commands so much respect, along with Messi. They are the two players of this era that I wouldn't say they're bigger than the football clubs that any football club they play for, because I think that would be wrong. But I think it's one of those for me that they are at such a level globally that they are celebrities, they are superstars as well as footballers. And I know you could say that in the past with players like David Beckham, but I think Ronaldo and Messi are two that are a completely different level. Even when Messi was playing at Barcelona, if he scored 3 in a game, people would be talking about his performance rather than Barcelona. It's the same with Ronaldo now. United win, but Ronaldo has scored a hat-trick and there's so much focus on him. And I think that's always going to maybe cause some tension within a dressing room. But if your team's successful, it's no issue. You thrive off that. He takes a lot of pressure off you, I would argue. You know, as a footballer, I think that's the way Maguire and others should have seen it when he came in. He will take attention away from you in terms of headlines and columns and all those kind of things that footballers maybe dread reading or hearing about themselves. So it's a situation that clearly has worked for Ronaldo. And I think it has worked for United to the extent that he scored lots of goals. They've obviously made a lot of money commercially. So for the ownership, that'll tick a lot of boxes. Unfortunately, from a sporting perspective, it's just been dreadful. But as you said, Kyle, I don't think you can overly pin that on Ronaldo. I think for anyone at the age of 37 to have given the input, I think it's 21 goals in all competitions and maybe 22 now. For anyone at that age to give that level of output could never be described as a problem, in my opinion. And when you look at I think that's the real issue for United going forward, strengthening that defence and solidifying the midfield, particularly in that holding role. I certainly don't think that Ronaldo is the big problem for going forward for United if he stays or even if he goes. I think if he leaves this summer, I think you'll look back and say, look, he gave his all, he scored goals, he did what he does. It's just a shame there wasn't a strong foundation alongside him to maybe help him win the trophies that he clearly wants to win.
Yeah, my theory on the Ronaldo Maguire situation, on with Ronaldo and other players, is that I think Maguire was the leader of the dressing room last season, and Ronaldo has come in, who's much more successful than Harry Maguire. A lot of the players, include mostly the Portuguese speakers, have gravitated towards Ronaldo. And Maguire has lost his authority, so there's obviously some tension there. And I think he's tried to raise standards. I mean, a lot of players have been coasting under Ollie. You know, I'm not convinced that losing really hurts this team. For Ronaldo is an absolute winner, and obviously he's tried to change attitudes. And we've seen that interview he did with Sky, where he complained about where he was giving advice to young players and they weren't taking it on board the same way as he used to do when he was 18. So yeah, I think he probably has caused some issues within the dressing room, but I think he's only trying to do the right thing. He's trying to create a winning mentality, and obviously a lot of these players just aren't up to it. Um, Another thing that I've noticed in recent weeks is that when Rashford and Lingard come off the bench, United get worse. So I think, what is the point in making substitutions at all? Either bring on Garnacho and Hannibal, or don't bring anyone on, because when he's bringing Rashford and Lingard on, the United actually get worse. Have you noticed that yourself?
Yeah, no, to be honest with you, I think Lingard's in a tricky position. Roy Keane made the point in a recent broadcast in Sky that he probably should have left the club 18 months to 2 years ago, and I think that's spot on, to be honest with you. He's a player who's definitely had good moments in a United jersey. The FA Cup under Louis van Gaal, of course, been a real highlight for him. But his time at United had gone a while ago, and I think now more so than ever, when he's out of contract in the summer, it's evident that he's moving on. I don't understand why Ranić would be trusting him and putting him on to potentially try and change a game for United, because you said earlier, Kyle, you don't think that this team hurt when they lose, and if you're out of contract in the summer and you've got a big move abroad or domestically, the last thing you want is a serious injury. So is Jesse Lingard going to dive into a 50-50 in the last minute to save you in a game? I don't really think he is. Now, I could be totally wrong, and people that know him might say, no, he absolutely will give his all to the end. But I think it's natural in any walk of life. I mean, if you work as a shift worker in a warehouse or whatever, and you're on 12-hour shifts and you're consistently working your backside off, and you now know your notice period is 2 weeks, I would imagine you would take your foot off the gas slightly and slow down and do things more at your own pace, just even subconsciously if it's not a conscious thing, because we're all human beings, and that's the kind of human condition. So I think it's one of those where Lingard and others that are out of contract are in a catch-22 where they, of course, need to play relatively well, or try and play relatively well, because they are on television, they are covered in global media. So if you have 10 absolute stinkers in a row, then it is going to affect you in the summer unless you've got that pre-contract signed up. But at the same time, the catch-22 comes in because they need to look after themselves. As I say, the last thing he wants is to get an injury that keeps him out for 9 months, because if he gets a bad injury, I don't see United keeping him on for 9 months on the same salary he's on now, to be honest with you. So he's just looking to move on and look after himself. And fair play to him, good luck to him. He's earned the right to do that, but of course with the fact that United let his contract run down to this stage, and so is he. So it's one of those where good luck to him in the future, but he's not someone who I'd be relying on between now and the end of the season. And unfortunately for United, there's so many of them. Pogba, of course, who I doubt we'll see again after that incident against Liverpool. You obviously get Matic, who, to be fair, has played okay in spells, but I think it's safe to say his best football's behind him. Same for Juan Mata. He's a lovely guy. He's great within the dressing room. He'll always look to get on the ball and create something when he's on. But again, he's someone who I would argue his best days have been behind him now for about 2 years or so. So that's the situation United are in. They're relying on players that aren't going to be there, or they're relying on players that don't want to be there. And the thing that sums it up is you've got players like Eric Bailly, who couldn't get a game ahead of Phil Jones against Liverpool, and people said, oh, that says something about Phil Jones. No, it says something about Eric Bailly. There's clearly something horribly wrong with him behind the scenes. The fact that Ranić's chosen to put Phil Jones into that occasion, which I thought was unfair on Jones, I have to say. Second game in 2 years against that Liverpool side at Anfield, I thought was a massive ask, and one that I think was just asking too much of him, to be honest. But it's a team full of more problems and more questions than answers and solutions, and that's the the big thing that Ten Hag's walking into. And hopefully he's a nice refreshing couple of weeks to himself after the season with Ajax, and comes in all guns blazing, because he's really going to need to have the most enthusiasm in the world for this job, and not let it burn him out or drain him out within the first few months, because there's so many issues that need resolved ASAP.
Yeah, there's 6 players I think leaving on a free, and we're still using 5 of them. The other one's been on holiday all season. Cavani, who we probably won't see him again either. In addition to Pogba. So just in keeping with podcast tradition, I'm going to do some player ratings on the Arsenal game. And De Gea, for me, will get a 6. Dallo a 3. Uh, Varane a 5. Lindelof a 4. Telles a naught. McTominay a 3. Matic a 4. Bruno a 1. Sancho 6. Ronaldo a 7. And Elanga a 5. And Ralf Rangnick would only get a 4 because I don't agree with the decision to play Telles at left back, considering how poor he'd been recently. Um, yeah, and some of the other decisions that I wasn't. I would have actually went for like you say. I don't think it's wise to play through all the youngsters in, but I would have started Hannibal Mabry against Arsenal, because or at least played him for 60 minutes or so because against Liverpool, he was the only player who showed any fight, and the fans really liked that. You know, most of the team just capitulated at Anfield, whereas he came on, he got stuck in. He could have even got second yellows, 2 yellows in that game because he put himself about that much. So, it was a very small silver lining to what happened at Anfield, but I do think he should have been rewarded for that rather than being put back into the under 23s. What do you think about it?
Yeah, as I say, I think he came on, he was a bright spark, and as you've said, he rejuvenated the fans that were left inside the crowd at Anfield. And as Gary Neville said, it was you maybe shouldn't celebrate players kicking into someone, but I think we just needed to see some ferocity and adrenaline put into the performance. He certainly added that, albeit very late on in the game when he was given the opportunity. And I think if he was to have come in against Arsenal, he would have had the full backing of the fans inside the ground and any fans watching at home, because they would have been enthused with the effort and commitment he showed in those brief few minutes at Anfield. So I think if there was ever a game to put him in and let him show what he can do, Arsenal was probably the game, because he had a lot of backing on his side heading into it. But as it stands, obviously he didn't play. He was with the under 23s, and with the 4 games to go, it's surely only a matter of time before he gets a start, because I don't see any point in persisting with Lingard and others, as I've said, because you know what you're going to get from them, and what you're going to get from them is something that I don't think is going to really outweigh what a youngster would give you. I think a youngster would come in and give you every single thing that they've got because they want to play for Manchester United, whereas a lot of these players that are leaving have checked out months ago. They're not interested in playing for Manchester United anymore.
Yeah, I didn't agree with bringing Lingard and Rashford on anymore because that's just a waste of time as well now because they're not offering anything. Like you say, Lingard's obviously going to protect himself because he's going on a free in the summer. So now that we're almost certainly not going to make the top 4, I expect to see more game time for the likes of Hannibal Mabry, Alvaro Fernandez, and Alejandro Garnacho. In the remaining 4 games, I would like to see some starts and some substitute appearances for those players because it's generally what we see at the end of the season anyway. When there's dead rubbers, we tend to see a lot of debuts. It particularly happens in the 38th game of the season, but I think it might as well happen now because we're not going to make top 4. I mean, even Ranić has conceded that. So the only thing to look forward to now, from a fan point of view, is next season when the Ten Hag revolution gets underway. Although the club have briefed the press today to say that not to expect a revolution, more evolution. They weren't happy with Ranić's comments after Anfield that we need as many as 10 new players. There's no way United are going to sign 10 new players in one window. But I was a bit worried about hearing that today that it could be 3 in, 3 out again. No, in addition to the 6 players going on the free, that's just not enough. It has to be more than 3 signings. It's I mean, it has to be 4 or 5 at least, and then obviously you would promote some of the players that are out on loan. James Garner will hopefully come into the first team picture. Donny van der Beek will probably come back because with Ten Hag being manager. Um, yeah. So, how many players do you think United need to sign this summer?
I think they need probably 6 signings. I don't think they'll get it. I think they will get 3 or 4, and the others will be supplemented from those that are out on loan. To be honest with you, I think that's the way they'll go about it. If the club finishes 8th and only has 1 game a week, then I think they will get away with having a slightly smaller squad than they ordinarily would. Maybe that's why they're briefing those sorts of things today, because that seems to be the way that United are heading, albeit Wolves losing to Burnley. Maybe not ideal if you want to avoid that Conference League scenario, which United unfortunately look as if they're going to end up in, against potentially Hearts of Scotland. They're going to be in that next season if they don't qualify for Europa. They're guaranteed group stage, so United could be heading to Tynecastle rather than places like the San Siro or the Bernabeu, which is unthinkable, really. So yeah, as I say, for me, I think United need 6 players. I don't think they'll get it. I think they'll prioritise another central defender. I don't see Harry Maguire really featuring as a mainstay under Eric Ten Hag. I could be completely wrong with that, of course, but I think United probably have to move on from him now. Or if he is going to be part of Ten Hag's system, I don't think he should retain the armband anyway. Holding midfielder's an absolute must. Another central midfielder on top of that's an absolute must, and a striker. Is a must, particularly if Ronaldo leaves. But even if Ronaldo stays, Cavani's going. The Greenwood situation doesn't look as if it's going to be resolved anytime soon. And with the complexities of that, of course, I mean, I don't know how you handle that going forward, to be honest with you. Martial definitely doesn't have a future for me at United. He's not been pulling up trees with any great regularity at Sevilla, so he's probably another one in the way out. And Rashford, for me, is not someone who's going to be a centre forward that takes Manchester United forward. So, as I say, those 4 positions, the real spine of the team needs addressed. The right back situation clearly needs addressed as well. I mean, realistically, I would say you need another centre half to start alongside Varane or Lindelof. You're going to need another right back. You're going to need a holding midfielder. You're going to need a central midfielder, and you potentially need a starting striker. So it's and maybe another wide player as well, because Alanga has been good, but I don't think he's quite ready to start week in, week out. And I think we're seeing that. He's a teenager after all. He's going to have some great games and some relatively quiet ones. So yeah, I'd say 6 players, but if United get 3, then I'd probably just accept that, because that's the reality. I highly doubt that they're going to go out and bring in 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. And I think, to be honest with you, the club will be sweating over the next few weeks, because Ralph Rangnick's starting to let go now. And the more that he does let go, the more I think he won't be involved at United going forward in any meaningful role. To be honest with you, I know some people are thinking he's going to get more of a say. I really don't. If the club are briefing against him today and what he said, then expect over the next few weeks for him to just keep coming out with what he really thinks. And then come the end of the season, I wouldn't be surprised if he's working elsewhere, doing another major role, albeit he might have, I think they said something like 9 contact days at United a month or something. You know, it's minuscule stuff we're talking about here, and he's been linked with the Austrian national team job. And do you know, I wouldn't be surprised if he goes and gets his teeth stuck into something else, because I really don't see United taking what he has to say seriously going forward, judging by the sort of leaks and reports and briefings that are coming out in the last few weeks.
Yeah, I think we will definitely sign 3 players, possibly a 4th if we're able to make some money from sales. But I don't see any more than that. And the reality is we do need at least 6. So there's going to be some holes that are not going to be filled. Yeah. So with regards to the who's in charge of the football side of the club, obviously there's a new head coach coming in. John Merto and Don Fletcher are there as the football director and technical director. Ranić is going to be the consultant. At the moment, he is anyway. Like you say, the situation could change because he's been too blunt in his media interviews, and maybe the club won't like that. He's exposing a lot of the problems internally, and it's not usually how someone employed by the club behaves. And you can imagine that some of the hierarchy uh, won't take that very well. Although us as fans are loving these honest interviews from Ralph Rangnick. But another man who's been linked with coming in as the head of recruitment is Paul Mitchell, who currently works at Monaco as their director of football, and he's worked at RB Leipzig with Ralph Rangnick, and he's also worked at Spurs during Pochettino's time there, and he's unearthed a lot of hidden gems. And I think he's from Manchester and supports United, so that would be a real step in the right direction if we got him in as head of recruitment. But it's every United fan will be feeling the same way, that it just doesn't feel realistic. It doesn't feel like something that United would do under this current regime.
If Paul Mitchell comes in, then definitely Ralph Rangnick is being listened to, because he is someone who's been recommended to United from Rangnick himself. Steve Brown's currently United's head of recruitment. I don't see that position changing anytime soon. I think he'll retain that role. United are looking at what they call a deputy director of football or football director. Would Paul Mitchell fill a deputy role when arguably he's more experienced on the recruitment side of things than a John Murtagh? I couldn't see that working, so something would have to change behind the scenes. Jim Lawler and Marcel Bout, as Andy Mitten revealed first on The Athletic, have left the club. Although Jim Lawler has been sort of sidelined in recent years, particularly when it comes to recruitment, as Gary Neville and others have pointed out on social media and on their platforms. So it's one of those where, unfortunately, you said it perfectly earlier, Kyle. I think we're looking at evolution rather than revolution, but I think everyone knows revolution is what's needed if United are to come back to the top anytime soon. There's only so many times you can evolve what's already there before you need to really clear the decks and start again. And the thing that frustrates me greatly is, with so many players out of contract, if there was ever a time that a revolution was realistic, this is the time. And if they're not willing to do it now, then I don't see when they're going to be willing to do it in the future, because I don't know any other top club that's as hopeless at getting rid of players that they don't want than United. I mean, you just have to look at Liverpool. They managed to sell guys. They've managed to sell guys that they don't want for years and get decent value for them. I mean, I think was it the left back? Was it Brad Smith years ago? They managed to get 8 million from Bournemouth from him, 15 million for Jordan Ibe and players like that. Whereas United pay players far in excess of what they're worth, that even when you want to get rid of them, nobody can match their wages. I can already see that this summer. I mean, people are talking about maybe Tele's been up for sale, Wan-Bissaka, and you think Wan-Bissaka came into United for about 45, 50 million pounds. I think you'd be lucky to get half that. I think you might get 20 for him if you're lucky. But if he's on in excess of £100,000 a week, which again, I don't know, I'm just speculating, then who's realistically going to pay that? I don't think you're going to see that from a team in the Bundesliga or the French league. You're not going to see it from anyone other than the top two in Spain, who won't be after him. Could he go to Italian football? Yes, he potentially could. But again, are they going to be willing to pay him what he's on at United? Probably not. And Martial, of course, is the biggest example of that. By all accounts, he's on £250,000 a week. Joe Glazer, of course, refused to let Jose Mourinho sell him because he personally thought he was someone who was he could be compared to Pele, which is just hilarious and ridiculous at the same time. So that's what you're up against. And unfortunately, I think United are going to have a difficult summer shifting many of these players unless they heavily subsidise their wages on loan deals. Because, as I say, who's been watching Wan-Bissaka for the last 2 seasons and thought he's what I need from my team? Yes, he's good defensively, although that's eroded this season. But he looks terrified every time he gets the ball. He's not comfortable on the ball, and if you want to play in any elite level, then you're going to have to do that. That, of course, could be brought to his game by coaching, but for me, when he came in at United, I expected him to be far better than he was when he just went through the door, and arguably he stagnated and he's became worse than he was when he came through the door, which I suppose could only happen at United.
Do you remember in the Van Gaal summer, the first summer that he came in, a lot of players that he wanted to sell were let go for very small fees, like Chicharito, Johnny Evans, Donny Welbeck. That's what United need to do this summer. Any offers that come in for players that United want to sell, they just have to accept them and let them go. Don't be looking for unrealistic fees that no one's ever going to pay. Like you say, the wages is obviously an issue too, but if if people are willing to offer money for these fringe players that United don't want, they have to be willing to accept it, and don't be looking unrealistic fees. They have to be willing to take a cut, and take a loss on a lot of these players because they're never going to recoup the money that they paid for them, and they have to be realistic because if they don't, we're going to be stuck with this bloated squad of players that the Ten Hag doesn't want, and we're just going to be exactly where we are now. It could even cause dressing room unrest. And if there is, it could cause it to continue. And obviously, it's well underway, but we don't want that continuing into next season. We all unhappy players have to be let go, and all players that Ten Hag doesn't want have to be let go. And if there is players that they're not part of his plans, that can't be sold, then they have to be frozen out. You have to be ruthless. I mean, you look what Mourinho did with Bastian Schweinsteiger. I didn't really agree with that, but if there is a player that's still here in August, September, that Ten Hag it doesn't have in his plans, then I think that's what he should do with that individual. There's no point in keeping a player that's either unhappy or a player that the manager doesn't want, as part of the first team setup. So, yeah, I think United need to get ruthless and start selling players, a lot better than they have been doing it in recent seasons, and just be willing to let them go for moderate fees.
Absolutely. If there, as I said earlier, I think if there was ever a time to clear the decks, this is the time, and it'll be a real test of the club's resolve this summer, because if they say we've offered 20 for, say, Wan-Bissaka, but we'll maybe give him another year and we might get 30 next summer, then he could have another dreadful season, and you're talking about 15 next summer, and that's a further loss. So I think they need to just cut their losses, as you say, Kyle, on the players they don't want, regroup and re-sign the players that they do, and go again, because as Ralph Rangnick has said, there is no reason why United can get it right in the recruitment side over the next 2 years and get back competing quickly. If the club have got the appetite to do that's another thing, because if they stick to, say, 3 players in and all those players go out, you're talking about a lot of youngsters that are going to heavily be relied on if there is an injury crisis and a fixture pile up. And if that costs you getting into the top 4 or competing in one of the domestic cups, then fans are going to be angry about that, and rightly so. So they really need to make sure they strike the balance correctly.
Yeah, and the absolute crucial position in terms of incomings this summer is that defensive midfield area, or just midfield area in general, because it was something that wasn't addressed last summer when it should have been the absolute priority. Today, United have been linked with Frankie de Jong from Barcelona. It seems like an obvious link to make because he's played under Ten Hag at Ajax before and excelled. I don't think we should send a player who's happy in Spain. You could find ourselves in another Di Maria situation there. So I don't think that's realistic anyway. I don't think he's going to drop out of the Champions League to come and play in the Europa Conference League with Man United. There've been some other links like Declan Rice. I mean, what West Ham are quoting is just obscene, and that's not going to happen. But one of the more realistic options that have been talked about, and specifically from Samuel Luckhurst in the MEN, is the Calvin Phillips, the England international. He plays for Leeds. That seems like a realistic option for United this summer. Would you welcome him through the door at Old Trafford?
I would do. I think that's a signing that United could get done and get done relatively efficiently. I think basically what United need to do is recruit players who will fit the way Erik Ten Hag wants to play. And if you look at Jurgen Klopp when he went into Liverpool, it took him a fair few years to churn players that he didn't fit in out and get ones in that he wanted. Now, all of them don't work straight away. For instance, someone like Calvin Phillips might come in and do a job for 2 years, then you upgrade him and he becomes a squad player. And I think that's something that United need to be better at, because you look at Liverpool again. I hate to keep mentioning Liverpool on a United pod, but I mean, they bring Diogo Jota into into the club, and many people think he's just going to play bench to the other players, but he gets into the squad, he forces his way in. He can keep Firmino out, who people thought was undroppable. You've now got Diaz in, who can sometimes keep a Mane or whoever out. So there's plenty of options out there, and I think United need to go out, recruit to the system and recruit to their manager, build a structure around that, and really give them the chance to be successful. There's no point, for instance, there'd be no point of giving Jurgen Klopp Harry Maguire, for instance, when he wants both his centre halves on the halfway line and pressing high. You need to be realistic, and I hope United are in the market and give Ten Hag what he needs, because there's no point giving him a 34-year-old defensive midfielder when he's going to need someone who is youthful, who can get around the park and who can get on the ball. And Calvin Phillips, although maybe not as good as Declan Rice or others that have been mentioned, I think is a solid player and one that could improve under the right coaching. So I think that would be a good signing, provided it's not at a ridiculous price.
Yeah, and we heard from Fabrizio Romano repeatedly that Ten Hag would not sign the contract until he was given assurances that he will be involved in not only incomings, outgoings, and when it comes to player contracts as well, that he would be consulted in all those matters, and he will make the decision together with the board and all those. And I hope that it's actually built into his contract in writing as well, and that they can't make a decision without him, because all the players that come in have to fit into his system. They have to be players in a particular position that he needs, or players that he rates. We can't have the board kind of overruling him, like what we've seen in the past. I mean, Cavani clearly wasn't a player that Solskjaer had on his list. Neither was Van der Beek. Ronaldo was just signed totally out of the blue. It was an opportunistic signing to try and prevent him from going to Manchester City. All that needs to stop. Every single player has to come in to fit into Ten Hag's style of play.
Absolutely. And as I said earlier with Ronaldo, I mean, yes, it would be good to see him stay for another season. I think that would be a positive. But again, it needs to be down to the manager. It can't be down to a commercial standpoint or something happening out of an idea that's not the manager's. If he wants Ronaldo, keep him. If he doesn't, get rid of him. And that goes for any player, because you cannot look at Joe Hart, for instance, always up at Celtic now, doing really well. Pep Guardiola went into Man City. Joe Hart was a modern day Man City legend. He was part of that team that won the title under Roberto Mancini. He was someone who captained the team on numerous occasions. He was the England #1. Guardiola comes in and says, "Nope, you're not playing, you're out." And again, it was unpopular at the time. Obviously, he didn't get it right with Claudio Bravo and Willie Caballero, but he eventually gets Ederson. They get it right, they move on. And as great as Joe Hart was for Man City, the fans aren't pining back for him. Whereas I feel like United have the fear of getting rid of someone because they think fans might pine back for them. I mean, I really liked Ander Herrera when he was at the club, but some of the comments you read online, you would think United had lost Paul Scholes at his peak. The way that some fans pine for him back because the midfield is quite poor. So I think United need to be careful in terms of how they handle this summer. I think they have to, as I say, back the manager 100%. And if that's unpopular with fans or elements of the media, then so be it. He has to be given the chance to succeed or fail in his own terms, because if he's not, then what's the point of having him? If you want someone to come in and shape their team with a mishmash of players, then hire a head coach that you can control, and maybe a Graham Potter or someone that would be grateful for the opportunity. So the way I look at it is United have got a manager on the up, back him and see if we can take United on the up with him.
Yeah, I don't know about you, but I've been following James Garner's progress all season, and I think he's just went from strength to strength, and he's going to be coming back to United at exactly the right time, with a Dutch manager coming in who's accustomed to blooding young players at Ajax, and we're expecting to see a lot of that at United too. So he might find himself in the first 11 next season. If had it been, Mourinho, Ranić, or Ollie, I couldn't see James Garner having anything other than a bench role at best. But with a Dutch manager coming in, I wouldn't be surprised to see him in the starting 11. The only thing is, I think he needs to have an experienced midfielder alongside him, because it's a big ask to come in for at a club like United that has such high expectations, and you've only played first team football in the Championship really, to come in and hit the ground running would be very difficult for him. But that's why I think that if he's alongside an experienced midfielder like Calvin Phillips, for example, then it would make life easier for him. So, are you excited for Jimmy Garner coming into the United first team picture next season?
Absolutely, I think he's earned it as well. I think he'd obviously had the spell at Watford, and it didn't go particularly well for him. He's went to Nottingham Forest under Chris Hughton and now Steve Cooper, and he seems to get better with each passing week. He's someone who, if he doesn't play for United's first team next year, I think will be loaned out within the Premier League, which again will only help him. There was interest up here from one of the big two clubs in James Garner in the summer, but obviously they chose to go back to Nottingham Forest, which has been a sensible move, and Steve Cooper is getting the best out of him. So I hope he can be an asset to United next season, because, as you say, that midfield option badly needs fresh investment and fresh infrastructure.
Yeah, and just on the top two in Scotland there, Diallo has went on loan to Rangers, and it hasn't really worked out for him. He started off very well, but now I don't think he's in the team that much. So that loan spell has not really served its purpose. But he might have to come back next season to be like we've talked about already. There's so many players leaving on a free, and some players will probably be sold as well. So in terms of having a squad, he'll probably have to be at United next season to be a squad filler. But it's been a very, very disappointing loan spell, hasn't it?
Yeah, he's not been good up here at Rangers at all. I said when he arrived at Rangers, a lot of people were saying, "Oh, brilliant, he's going to go and light Scottish football up." And I did warn them. Celtic and Rangers are currently in a title race, which is very tight, one of the tightest in many years here in Scotland. And obviously, at the moment, Celtic are top of the league by 6 points. But when he arrived up here, he was under new management, obviously, with Van Bronckhorst replacing Steven Gerrard. And it's one of those signings where in Scotland, the brutal reality is a draw is horrible and a defeat is a disaster. And that's the way that the press report it, that's the way the fans react to it, and that's the way the players react to it. And although you could say, oh, United's similar, of course it is, he wasn't really in the first team picture at United on a consistent basis. So he's essentially went from being injured and being in and out the under-23s to going into a Rangers side who were competing in Europe, in the Europa League latter stages, and they're obviously competing for the title and the Scottish Cup in Scotland. So it's, I imagine, been a culture shock to him in many ways. He obviously played at Celtic Park early on in the Derby match, and he looked a little bit lost that night after the first 20 minutes, where he got the ball a few times, and unfortunately it's not got much better for him. Started at the weekend, Rangers get a red card, and he's the first player off, and I think that tells you everything at the moment for him. It's not worked out for him in Scotland, and obviously there's a few weeks left, but I would expect United would loan him out to a Championship club in England next season potentially, or back into continental Europe, because he's, from what I've seen of him in Scottish football, he's certainly not ready to play for Manchester United or a Premier League side at this stage.
No, definitely not. He's become a bit of a Donny van der Beek at Rangers this season, hasn't he? Not really getting much of an opportunity. And when he has, he's been a bit hit or miss. He scored on his debut, I think, and then I think the second game was that Old Firm, and it was a real eye opener for him because he was getting no time or space on the ball. There was like 3 players around him every time he picked up the ball, and he was struggling. And it has, like you said, it hasn't really got much better for him. And you know, like you said there, when Rangers got a red card, he was the first player off. That just reminds me of Donny van der Beek against Young Boys. I think he was the first player to come off when Wan-Bissaka was sent off in that game. So yeah, things not working out for him there. But I mean, yeah, ideally he needs to go to a club where he's guaranteed to start for 38 games. But who knows what could happen, because we could be really short on numbers next season, like I've said, and he might have to be there to make up the numbers. So we'll leave it there. It's been an absolute pleasure having you back on the show again, Callum.
Always a pleasure, Kyle. Just hopefully the next time I'm on, things are looking more rosy than they are at the moment, because it's been a tough few months, tough few weeks for United, but I'm sure the club can bounce back soon.
A tough 9 years, more like.
Well, that's true. That's true.
Okay, I'll definitely have you on again later in the year. So see you later.
Take care. Bye-bye.